There's nothing quite like visiting a publisher to see a game, only to live with far more than you bargained for. Criterion's passion for each project bleeds into the games themselves. However, it's not restricted to the class of 2010. When we decided we wanted to get the real story behind Burnout free, Alex Ward was keen to reunite the original team, and over the course of our day at the Guildford studio, we got to see old friends reunited after several years. It wasn't long before sparks started to fly that made the ones in Burnout free seem like sparkles by comparison. And amid the banter, the revelations, and the stirring of the long dormant memories, come a number of genuine world firsts. We've barely sat down when Alex Ward first mentions a cancelled project. A project nobody outside Criterion has ever seen before. A project that directly led to Criterion's finest work and one of the all-time great racing games. So, what is this mystery game? You could guess until you were blue in the face and were rocking a tier 1 operator style beard, and we reckoned you'd still be no closer. So we'll let the outspoken swearbox frequenter Alex Ward fill you in. Criterion started talking to EA in 2002, and they asked if we'd be interested in doing a remake of the old Commodore 64 and NES game Skate or Die. He reveals, "These guys wanted to make a skateboarding game, so we did it. This is the first game Criterion made with EA, and these guys were on what was then the Airblade team. Sony were interested in the sequel, but the guys didn't want to do that. Nobody knows about this, and we've never shown this before. We feel somewhat privileged when we realize that we're the first people outside of Criterion and Electronic Arts to witness anything on this MIA Extreme Sports remake. And the team are far more open and less inhibited in talking about their internal workings than any other we've encountered. Where the others might only mention such a perceived failure in passing, here we're instead introduced to a number of the original team and shown everything from concept videos to gameplay footage. Designer Craig Sullivan eagerly gives us a little background on both himself and the project. I grew up in Cardiff with the guys that went on to do Dirty Sanchez, and I street skated from when I was about 13 until about 21, he tells us. And with his skating credentials in order, he goes on to explain what the team wanted from the game. In Tony Hawk's, you were always on board, and it was all about the tricks and high scores. But I wanted to explore what it was like to just go out for a skate and have that feeling of just doing whatever you want. There was that experience from when I went skating in real life that just wasn't captured in video games. I wanted to be able to get off the board, and this was way back in 2002. But for all the ideas it might have had, the guys had apparently already seen a glimpse of the future when Airblade was altered due to publisher pressure, as Alex Ward explains. Acclaim on Burnout and Burnout 2, they gave us pretty much free reign. We made the game and, well, they released it. These guys worked with Sony Europe on Airblade, which started as Tony Hawk on a flying board. But then we had Sony pushing the influence of the story, and Shenmue, I remember them talking about. Well, we were happy with it, right? The table rumbles with agreement. But it didn't fulfill everything we wanted to do. So then with Skate or Die, we were working with the big boys, with EA. We had people coming to us early in the project wanting to know where it was going to be. Obviously, we wanted to work with EA because we were an independent studio at the time, and we wanted to work with the best publishers. Alex Ward continues. We talked to all the publishers when we went to sell Burnout, and EA was really the only one to ask us questions about the gameplay. Everyone else was like, the game looks good, Do you want $1 million? When will it come out? Then the Burnout guys, after Burnout 2, we were talking to EA Canada about doing a Need for Speed game. So we put together a pitch to do a stunt racing game called Need for Speed Split Second. But with even two potentially massive titles on the table, it wasn't to be all smiles and rainbows. We didn't even know the rules of the game, Alex Ward admits. EA was a much more professional company than Criterion. We were only with about 130 people. If that, it was an eye-opening experience. At this time, the Airblade team was the A team and the Burnout team was the B team. We were told, oh, you can't just make a Tony Hawk game, it's got to be like Grand Theft Auto. And that was the first time we were like, really? It's got to be open world. Well, what does that even mean? Nobody really knew. We watched as the game changed direction before our very eyes. From a classic skating game to a Grand Theft Auto inspired open world ideas, through to an ingenious skating evolution concept. But the simplicity with which the various videos flow onto the screen belies the confusion and trauma the team went through in trying to score when the goalposts were moving so quickly and so frequently. Sullivan tells us of a number of serious illnesses he went through as a result of the constant stress, and he wasn't alone. The team was, according to all present at the 2010 Summer's Day, in turmoil. Something had to be done. A decision was reached on the future of Skate or Die. The team chose Die. We called a meeting with the EA guys and told them that we were walking away, and they went mad, threatening to sue us, threatening to put us out of business. There was a lot of anger and frustration, Alex Ward recalls. Then we got a call from the Need for Speed guys, and they said, we can't work with you guys anymore. You just walked away, and there's a shame on your company, so we can't talk to you. I remember coming back to my desk, and there was a folder on my desktop called EA, and I just clicked delete. We learned a lot about how a game should be made, and we learned a lot about working with an external publisher. How we had to get our shit together earlier, but also how we had to stand our ground. And that was that. Until E3 2003 at least, when Alex Wood was approached by EA's Bruce McMillan with an unexpected request. EA wanted to be friends again. We just said no. We'd been through it, we seen the team, we seen the stress, and we seen the ruin. We said we didn't want to do it that way. So he said, how about we do a game you want to make? How about we do a Burnout free? And we just said, no chance. But thankfully for us, EA persisted. I remember one of the EA guys before telling us, you guys got lucky with Burnout. If you were doing that again, you'd be screwed. So, we were like, we'll show you. So we said we'd think about it, but there have to be conditions. Nobody comes to Criterion. We said, you'll leave us alone if we're going to do this. We make the game, so you have no say in what this game is going to be. We'd agree in the terms of the deal and show them the game in January, and then they'd go and put it on the shelves. It was a bit like what they do with EA partners now. So amazingly, we found ourselves starting Burnout free. We had to prove ourselves. We had the best tech in the world, the best team in the world, and we were going to make a racing game like no other. And so they did. Work started on Burnout 3 in June of 2003, and with the agreed ability to work more or less on its own terms, Criterion was free to make the game it wanted to make. From the quality of its previous racers, the team obviously had an affinity for the genre, and with the idea for a more aggressive kind of racing game having already been birthed from some of Burnout 2's rewarding emergent moments, like notching a rival into oncoming traffic. Progress was apparently swift. By January, Criterion already had a build ready to show EA. Alex Ward blows the dust off an old PlayStation 2 debug unit and fires it up. We're gobsmacked. Just 6 months of work on the game, and the result in that was, well, presentation and effects aside, shockingly close to the final game. We particularly enjoyed the Bill and Ted Esquire guitar licks that complement great plays or abject failures, not to mention the boxing bell sound effect when you knock out another car. Takedowns were clearly the game's key innovation, and Matt Webster, producer on the EA side, runs us through the process of taking these from a simple new gameplay element to becoming the X. An all-encompassing mission statement and the hinge that holds the whole game together. The first step? Make ramming another car off the road a spectacle on a scale nobody had ever seen. We were talking about showing the takedowns and everyone was just like, "Are you fucking mad? You want to change the camera? No one had done that before, right?" He laughs. "You're playing a racing game. You're driving a car and you're gonna look back to something and come back to the car? It'll never work." But it did. Alex Ward jumps in with how this led to another gameplay innovation. And from showing takedowns came the idea of playing the crash, and that's where Aftertouch came from. He later introduces a trio of coders on the game, or as he calls them, geniuses. Richard Parr, Alex Fry, and Ollie Reed. It's interesting chatting to these guys, not least to hear the trademark Criterion passion applied to a totally different aspect of the studio's titles. Fry in particular speaks as though anything other than a constant 60 FPS frame rate would bring shame upon his entire family. They said, "Just run it at 30. And I was like, "You don't know what you're talking about." I couldn't cope with that suggestion, he says. And while he makes it sights high, he still understands when it's best to compromise. We came out of that meeting and we realized that the crashes were slower. You weren't going 200 miles an hour, and you don't need that instant twitchy response. We could make it look amazing. It was worth it, so we had that final acceptance that 30 was fine for the crashes, and we could literally tenfold the amount of particles and debris and stuff. The spectacle was just so much more important than the frame rate at those moments in the game. And so, it came to be that Burnout 3 served up the greatest collections in gaming that nobody has ever seen, thanks to some bold and ingenious innovations. But the first didn't end there, and with the game though out the same year, EA pledged its support to Xbox Live. Criterion's project would also be one of the first racing games to go online, as lead programmer in that area of the game Paul Ross explains. It was a really great time for us because we'd never done anything online before, he tells us. The first thing we did was to do a networked version of Burnout 2, which about 3 people in the world have ever seen. But to get this up and running on our home internet connections, we couldn't connect to the servers here because of firewalls and things like that, so one of the IT guys had to set up the first server in his garage. We even had the PlayStation 2 and Xbox version running together as well. And this is where it all started. Even all the online stuff we do today is all based on this. Even the franchise's celebrated Crash mode saw a radical overhaul for Burnout 3. The sit back and watch approach of 2 replaced with aftertouch control, crash breaker and game-changing pickups, not to mention all the multiplayer potential. Designer Chris Roberts tells us of the trials of another of the new features, well, namely ramps. Our physics in the main game were pretty much designed to keep the car on the track. We don't want the cars taking off, so we had the hand of God pushing down on them. We tried to do physics ramp to start with, but you drive over them and, well, splat. So, what we did was to kill the car. This let the guys have a little fun with the quote-unquote dead car, bouncing it off traffic in the most spectacular pile-ups the hardware of the time could muster. And of course, there was coming up with 100 names, says programmer Leon Angus. The group failing about as they go through bashing almost every one of the pun crash names the game offers up. The space we had in front was very small, so a lot of names had to be removed. The worst one was one called Chili Con Carnage, but it got changed into Chili Crash, which doesn't even make any sense. Dodgy names didn't hurt the playability, thankfully, and the puzzle-based nature of the redesigned mode must rank as one of the sequel's most ingenious changes. But for all this innovating, the third Burnout game was still missing one pretty important element: a title. We tested a bunch of names: Fuel Injection, Crash and Burn, Seek and Destroy, and Takedown tested the worst. Alex Ward laughs. A few of the other abandoned subtitles came up in the conversation, too much derision. Though one of the more ludicrous suggestions, Burnout 3, See You in Hell, sees the table erupts in fits of laughter. Reading between the lines, it sounds as though EA's own focus testing on the game's title went quite differently, and the team later warmed up to Burnout 3 Takedown. This wasn't the only example of Criterion benefiting from EA's vast experience either. If I had to sum up the project in 2 words, they'd be collaboration and iteration. Nothing is right the first time, and it can always be better. We learn from the EA guys to take the best stuff, the stuff that the players love, and bring it to the front. And despite having once been resistant to EA's influence, Alex Ward recalls a time when he was on hand to extol the virtues of the powerful publisher's methods on a friend in need. At EA Hot Summer Nights, which is a showcase event, I met Carl Hilton from the Free Radical, and they were apparently going through their own skate or die experience with Timesplitter's Future Perfect. I asked how it was going, and he said, "Ugh, it's a nightmare. These guys are just horrendous. What's all this stupid X bullshit? We're doing a really good game, but these guys are just a pain in the ass. They want so much input. They want to visit our office, they tell us this and that and the other, and that it's just not good enough. I just want to tell them to fuck off." And that was us. It was us a year before Skate or Die. I sat down with him and told him not to be afraid of this process. You just need to give them what they need. All they're saying is that they don't get your game and they find it hard to talk about. It's not Alex Ward's only trade show based story either, and his fond memories of E3 2004 are shared by the entire team, most of whom seem to have gone out of the convention that year for Burnout's big push into America. I remember that nobody else had a chance at that show, he boasts. Seeing the Burnout video on that massive screen on the EA stand, I was just standing there, feeling really proud. But behind us were Robbie Batch, Jay Allard, and Seamus Blackley from Microsoft. I think Allard said something like, "Holy shit, that looks good," and I just remember thinking, this show is going to be amazing. We didn't even have to ask any leading questions or push anyone for Burnout 3 to be looted by most present as the game studio high point. And Alex Ward openly admits that the game's follow-ups may not have rediscovered the same magic formula it stumbled upon with Takedown. With Revenge, we didn't recreate what we had with Burnout 3. And while Revenge was Revenge, and it took its own path. I think we look back and think we should really have just made a sequel to Burnout 3, but it was too bloody obvious. Obvious perhaps, but we assume we're not the only ones hoping that the inevitable follow-up to the divisive Burnout Paradise returns to the foundations laid back in 2004. Burnout 3 is clearly the game I'm most proud to have worked on. The team were a great bunch of people, and we had a good laugh making it. Ward closes, and while his voice has been the loudest for much of Burnout's time in the spotlight, it's not a matter of pride. The opportunity to see the achievements of his colleagues celebrated alongside his own is one he embraced, calling all within earshot, and even a few far from afield, who worked on Burnout 3 to help us understand what made it so great. And after meeting the team, sharing in their highlights and their lowlights in surprisingly candid detail, and being given a window into the past in a way most developers either couldn't or wouldn't ever do, we understand. We completely understand.